So let's talk about the different parts of the brain and what they do. Parts of the brain are functionalized for different purposes. They do different things, which is that damage parts of the brain has different effects. It's why then you look at an fMRI scan or PET scan or something that records neural activity. You could figure out based on the location in the activity that's going on. So the first thing to realize is I'm talking about the brain, but I'd be more precise and more inclusive if I talked about the brain and parts of the spinal cord. So you don't need your brain for everything. There are certain activities we do that can happen without a brain, like a sucking in a newborn's or pulling your limb back to withdraw from pain or vomiting. But for everything else we'll talk about in this course, we really will be talking about the brain. So some of the structures of the brain that are highly relevant are called subcortical, which means they're below the cortex, which means they're in the center of the brain. This includes part of the brain like the medulla, which controls certain automatic function like your heart rate, your blood pressure, swallowing, and so on. It includes the cerebellum, which is involved in body balance and muscle coordination. It contains about 30 million neurons. So this isn't small potatoes. The hypothalamus, which is involved in feelings and sex, and the first are and different appetites. We're going to talk about emotions or visceral desires. We'll return to those parts of the brain. But for the aspects of psychology that are distinctive for us, that makes us human, we're mostly focused on the outer layer, the cerebral cortex. So the cerebral cortex is all crumpled up. If you to take a brain, pull out the cortex and straighten it out, like you're removing a rock you got from the trunk of your car and you have to straighten it out. It's about 2 feet square, so it's a lot of crumpling to get it done. It's about 3 millimeters thick. This is where the action is. This is where a list for the things I'm interested in. This is where it takes place. Is where reasoning and language and complex perception comes from. Fish don't have any cerebral cortex. Reptiles and birds have a little bit, but primates, including humans, have a lot. When you look at the cortex, you'll see it has 2 halves. It has a left half and the right left half. For each of these halves, then you look at it. You can demarcate the brain, the cortex, into different lobes. There's going from your forehead and swooping to the back. You have the frontal lobe, conveniently enough on the front, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. Each of these lobes there's different things which we'll talk about in a bit. Another thing about the cortex thought which is super interesting is that it includes maps. That I mean by it includes topographical maps. There are 2 things that are close together in the brain and similarly close together in the body. So there is a motor area where if you were to shock, parts of that brain, parts of the body would twitch accordingly. Just like you'd expect. The middle finger is close to the thumb, which is close to elbow. If it's close in the real world and your body is close to the brain, and there is a primary somatostry area, which is sense organs. There, if you have somebody in the operating table and you shock people, they would experience things. They might experience a sound or a flash of light or a touch. In fact, in the occipital lobe you have a map for vision and the temporal lobe you have a map for sound. That's really cool is, as said, the map is a topographical, but the size of the brain areas don't correspond to the size of the actual body areas, but rather to the extent to which there's motor or sensory fiction. So artists have drawn pictures of people if their body was proportioned to the extent that their brain was. You'd see the tuck of the body is relatively small, but their hands are enormous, and the face is enormous because there involve a lot of sensation. This is much more sensation going in your hand than in your whole back, even though the back is psychically apart. So part of the cortex is there's projections areas, but less than a quarter of the cortex contains projections areas, and I said the rest is involved with the cool stuff, with language, with reasoning, with moral thoughts, and so on. Then the question comes in, how do we know this? How do we know that part of the brain do that? That parts of the brain are involved, and why? There's different answers. So one answer is we can scan the brain. We can use MRI, which is a high frequency magnetic field, to look at the activity of the brain, that parts are active, then people do different things. We can also look at so-called natural experience when people have tumors or strokes or motorcycles accidents in damaged part of your brain, and we can ask the question that damage to which parts of the brain correspond to the damage to which functions. Through these different methods, we've learned about the different parts of the brain and what they do. So, could talk about some certain specific things that can go wrong due to brain damage or stroke or trauma. So, for instance, there's apraxia. Apraxia is problems of actions. So you enable to do the action like waving goodbye or picking up below before or can bring some food to your mouth. You're not paralyzed. You can make the movements if you have to, but you can coordinate these basic movements into complex actions. There's agnosia. Agnosia is a disorder of perception, and they're not like you can see but you can't recognize. Some is called psychic blindness. People of various forms of agnosia can describe a picture in terms of its part but can't recognize the objects that are being depicted. That's form of visual agnosia. There's also specific prosopagnosia, where you can't recognize faces. Oliver Sacks wrote a wonderful book many years ago called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. This was a series of problems of people who had surprising neurological disorders, and the title cause of the book was a man who actually had such an inability to recognize faces. He couldn't distinguish his wife's face from that of a hat. Milder forms of prosopagnosia, which some people suffer from, and to be honest, I got a little bit of some terrible faces. Is that you could recognize faces as faces, but you can't recognize those faces? Isn't very hard to you recognize people. There's problems of sensual neglect. You get disorder that blocks out of the one part of the world. You might have damage to parts of your brain that would block out the left side of the world. Is not just a sort of psychical thing. Then you ask somebody with such a disorder to draw a clock, for instance. They'll put all the numbers from 1 to 12, the right side of the clock. It's as if they don't think of the left side of the world again. So maybe it's not even a sensory problem, but an attentional problem. There's aphasia, which refers to disorders of language. Some forms of aphasia are experienced like a Broca's aphasia. where you can really speak a famous case of somebody who can only use the word 10. You would say 10, 10, 10, but couldn't say anything else. Or there's something that's called receptive aphasia. There you can speak, although that you say doesn't make much sense, but also you have a terrible time understanding other people. Then there is all sorts of the other disorders. There's the disorder which we talk about with regard to Phineas Gage and various forms of it. Or damage to your brain. It's debatable whether this is true Phineas Gage, but the other cases where it's much more clear, because you lose your moral sense, your sense of right and wrong, your ability to control yourself, to restrain yourself, perhaps your consistence. Now we're going to talk about all these things thought the course, but the moral here is that this is some localization of functions. There's some sense in which is correspond to different brain areas. Again, this is an argument against dualism. We can see that anyone who argued that the mind isn't brain would be hard-pressed to explain why damage to the brain seems to affect some very intimate and very important aspects of ourselves.